The Rains of Castamere feels rather ubiquitous in A Song of Ice and Fire, but what is the whole story behind it, and why does it strike fear into so many? Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. If you like theories, background, history and lore about A Song of Ice and Fire, The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher, then this is the place for you. Welcome. This is another collaboration with the excellent History of Westeros. Please do check out their podcast and YouTube channel. There's a link down below. Moments before violence breaks out at the wedding of Edmure Tully and Roslyn Frey, Catelyn begins to realise something is very, very wrong. George R. R. Martin writes, "Doubt gripped her heart, where an instant before had been only weariness." Another instant later, the musicians in the gallery begin playing the Rains of Castamere, chillingly confirming her suspicions. She knew the story behind the song, the vengeance of Lord Tywin Lannister. A song written about the darkest deed of your greatest foe, played out at your son's wedding, is indeed a bad sign, and moments later the wedding turned red. Though it was the swords of House Frey and Bolton, the lion's claws pulled the strings. They would never have taken such extreme measures without agreement from Tywin. Stories are often exaggerated, and songs even more so. The Rains of Castamere is both a story and a song, but needs no embellishment to capture our attention. The tale is memorable due to the sheer brutality involved and how it established Tywin's reputation at a very young age. Indeed, Tywin was not much older than Robb Stark at his crowning when these events took place, but we begin the tale when he was even younger, barely 10 years old and the heir to Casterly Rock. Tywin's father, Lord Tytos, was not a particularly proud man. He was very forgiving and willing to brush off insults. He lent money and did nothing when he wasn't paid back. He laughed and smiled a lot, and possessed an overall genial demeanour. In other words, he was the exact opposite of Tywin. When Tywin's sister Jenna was betrothed to Aemon Frey during a large feast at Casterly Rock, the 10-year-old Tywin spoke openly against the marriage, saying House Frey was not worthy of House Lannister. Young Tywin was not the only one upset by the match. The Lord of Castamere, Roger Reyne, famously called the Red Lion, stalked angrily from the hall, while his sister Ellyn laughed aloud. Even the amiable Lord Titus was embarrassed, but he didn't punish his son. Instead, he sent him to court to be a cupbearer for Aegon V. That's right, Tywin Lannister was once cupbearer to Egg. In addition, Tywin's brother Kevan was sent to squire for the Red Lion at Castamere to assuage the anger of the Reynes. The Reynes were very powerful at the time, second only to House Lannister in the Westerlands. To make things slightly confusing, the Reyne sigil was also a lion, red on a silver background, while the Lannister lion is golden with a red background. Like the Lannisters, the Reynes lived a life of relative luxury within a series of caverns, carving and shaping the stone into lavish and spacious halls, while extracting huge amounts of gold and silver from their mines. When the Kingdom of the West formed in the days of the First Men, a daughter of House Reyne married King Lorien I Lannister, bringing them into the kingdom peacefully. In summary, their lineage was ancient, their bearing proud, and their coffers overflowing. But in this era, their power was even greater, perhaps even at its peak, largely thanks to Lady Ellyn Reyne's ambition, her husband's strength, and Lord Tytos Lannister's weakness, which they exploited expertly. But let's start with Ellyn Reyne. Lady Ellyn had once been betrothed to Tytos's older brother Tywald, and was thus positioned to become the Lady of Casterly Rock, until Tywald died during the Peak Uprising. Her response to her fiancé's demise was to seduce his twin brother Tyon, even though he was already betrothed, and she was successful. Feel free to make your own moral judgments there, but she convinced him to set his betrothed aside to marry her instead. Tyon and Tytos's father, Lord Gerald the Golden, was also twice widowed and had entered into semi-retirement, allowing his heir Tyon to rule, which meant Lady Ellyn was in charge, because she in turn ruled Tyon. She used her power to enrich her brothers, the famous Red Lion Roger Reyne, as well as the younger Reynard Reyne. Lady Ellyn gave them offices and honours, and lent them large sums of money with little to no expectation of repayment. She increased her popularity, and thus her hold on power, by throwing lavish banquets and balls. But only a year after Lady Ellyn and Tywin Lannister were married, Tywin died in the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion. If Ellen had given birth to a child by Tywin, she might have remained in power as regent to her child, the eventual ruler of Casterly Rock, but their short marriage produced no heir, so she found herself on the outside. And Titus Lannister became the new effective lord of Casterly Rock. It seems that Lady Ellen tried the same tactic with him. She tried to seduce Titus, aiming to convince him to in turn set aside his wife, Lady Jane Marbrand. But we're told that Titus was not only too intimidated to perform in the bedroom, he also confessed to his wife, Lady Jane. She, in turn, told Lord Gerald, the actual Lord of Casterly Rock, who in turn became furious and roused himself from retirement to take control once more. His first act was to see Lady Ellen married off to Lord Walderin Tarbeck, a man twice her age and twice widowed, with sons to inherit Tarbeck Hall. She'd never returned to Casterly Rock, a place she had once ruled in all but name. She did, however, return to scheming. Lady Ellen and Lady Jane, the heir's wife, were already rivals. Ellen had rather brazenly already tried to steal Jane's husband, and they began what was dubbed the War of the Wombs, in which they competed to have the most children. Lady Ellen deliberately chose to name her children in ways that might upset the Lannisters. After people who had died, wives who had vanished, you get the idea. Meanwhile, Lady Jane Lannister named her first child Tywin. Yes, that Tywin Lannister, which is a rather long-winded way of explaining that Tywin Lannister had been born into the middle of a political conflict between the Lannisters and House Rain, with House Tarbeck now drawn into the conflict. The Lannisters were at a low ebb with a weak lord, Titus. Tywin's mother Jane had died a few years after he had been born, and Lady Ellen Rain, now Tarbeck, was now making repeated demands for lands and money from the Lannisters via her husband, Lord Tarbeck. This escalated to the extent that King Aegon V, Egg, became annoyed enough to demand Lord Titus take action against the Rains and the Tarbecks for their insubordination. It's possible, given his proximity to King Aegon, that Tywin had some measure of influence in this, but the main point here is that everyone knew that the Rains and Tarbecks were by this point seriously challenging the authority of the Lannisters. Still, the Red Lion, Lord Roger Rain of Castamere, and the young Tywin Lannister fought alongside each other in the War of the Ninepenny Kings to much acclaim. Though, as soon as that was finished, things reverted to type. The weak-willed Lord Titus Lannister continued to make his family look weak, emboldening houses Rain and Tarbeck. This, in turn, encouraged lesser lords to take liberties, growing lax in their duties, corrupt, or worse. Eventually, the West began to suffer from lawlessness, banditry, and unrest. This understandably angered Tywin greatly, and although he was initially tied to King's Landing, around the year 260 AC he was freed to return home. And on arriving back in Casterly Rock, he realised that his father's desire to please cut both ways. He could do things in the name of House Lannister, and his father wouldn't object. Tywin, now a war veteran, began to gradually assert greater and greater authority, rightly assuming that his father would simply allow it. Tywin decided to restore respect to the name of House Lannister. He decreed that every house in debt to Casterly Rock must repay their debts immediately, or send hostages. Meanwhile, he got his brother Kevan, yes, the Kevan Lannister we know in A Song of Ice and Fire, to organise a group of 500 veterans of the recent war to enforce this new stricter rule. Lord Roger Rain, the Red Lion, was said to have laughed at the new demands, telling his friends and fellow lords to ignore the demand outright. Lady Ellen wanted to go even further, however, and convinced her husband Lord Walderin Tarbeck to travel to Casterly Rock. She wanted him to go over Tywin's head to ask Lord Titus, still technically the Lord, directly to overturn the edict. Tywin, however, seems to have anticipated this move. When Lord Tarbeck arrived, Tywin had him seized and locked away. In response, Lady Ellen escalated the conflict by kidnapping 3 Lannisters, including Stafford Lannister, who has a minor role in A Song of Ice and Fire. At which point Tywin would have had Lord Tarbeck cut into 3 pieces, one for each Lannister hostage, but Lord Titus, again technically the Lannister lord at the time, even though everyone kept working around him, would never countenance such a bloody measure. He agreed to exchange Lord Tarbeck for the 3 Lannisters, and to Tywin's great frustration, forgave House Tarbeck's debts by way of an apology. Still, Tywin did not give up, and continued to act without his father's leave. The following year, 261 AC, he pushed the issue, sending ravens to both Tarbeck Hall and Castamere, demanding they travel to Casterly Rock to account for their crimes. Instead, both houses rose in rebellion and renounced their fealty to House Lannister. That's probably actually what Tywin wanted, an excuse to go to war. His intent was to do that which his father could not undo. There's no apologising or forgiving the dead. It seems that Elyn Tarbeck had long anticipated a conflict as well, and why not? She was a clever and ambitious woman, and may have at least somewhat taken the measure of young Tywin by this point. Thus, a large portion of House Tarbeck's cancelled Lannister debt had been spent on upgrading their castle and soldiery. Tywin didn't give them a chance to prepare. He attacked straight away. Tywin acted so quickly that Lord Tarbeck had only just called his banners, and none had yet arrived. Nevertheless, he led his household knights to face Tywin's host, instead of holing up in his castle to wait for help. It was a poor choice. The Tarbeck forces were massacred. One of Lord Tarbeck's elder sons was killed, while he himself and his other sons were captured. This time there would be no ransom. Tywin ordered their executions and had their heads mounted on spears. From her walls, Lady Elyn saw the grisly trophies as the Lannister host approached, but she did not break. When Sir Kevan asked for her surrender, she declared, "You are not the only lions in the west, sir. My brothers are coming, and their claws are just as long and sharp as yours." She expected a siege, and assumed she could hold out long enough for her brothers at Castamere to arrive. Indeed, Roger and Reynard Rayne acted quickly. The Red Lion's forces rode with all haste to Tarbeck Hall. But once again, Tywin acted faster, and within a day he had catapults ready. A well-placed stone smashed into Tarbeck Hall, bringing down the roof. Lady Elyn and her son Tyon were crushed to death. It was quite a statement. The most dangerous woman in the West, she who had moved so quickly in seizing opportunities along her path to power, was too slow for Tywin. The castle surrendered, and again Tywin gave no quarter. Elyn's daughters were forced to join the Silent Sisters, while her grandson was apparently thrown into a well by Sir Amory Lorch's father, who was also called Sir Amory. Sir Amory the Younger was the one to slay Princess Rhaenys during the sack of King's Landing, remember? An event commanded by Lord Tywin, of course, but over 20 years into the future. What was left of Tarbeck Hall was put to the torch. It is said that the flames burned for over a day, but before they went out, the Red Lion arrived. Though he had fewer men than Tywin, he expected to have the element of surprise, given Tywin's men were busy with the aftermath of taking and destroying Tarbeck Hall. Furthermore, he was the greatest knight in the West, and not known for his patience. The Red Lion's initial charge was quite successful, but Tywin's host, led by his War of the Ninepenny Kings veterans, were disciplined enough to recover, and eventually their greater numbers began to turn the tide. Sir Roger had no choice but to order a retreat, with only half of his men still alive. As they rode away from the battlefield, a crossbow bolt struck the Red Lion in the back, and help was required to get him back to Castamere. With his brother weak from his injury, Sir Reynard took command and ordered his forces to hole up in their fortified mines. Though Tywin was joined by other vassals, swelling his ranks, Sir Reynard knew there was no way for any host to storm the below-ground portion of his castle, no way for Tywin to take advantage of his far superior numbers. It could be said that Castamere was almost as impregnable as Casterly Rock, but while one resides in a tall mountain, the other is deep underground, and this difference proved pivotal. Sir Reynard sent terms to Tywin, declaring that they would renew their fealty to Casterly Rock and act with loyalty, if only Tywin would send his brothers to Castamere as hostages. Tywin did not deign to reply. Instead, the small portion of the castle above ground was put to the torch. Then he ordered his soldiers to seal all entrances to the mines with rock and dirt. Though Castamere is 9/10 underground, it was named after a nearby crystal blue pool. Tywin ordered that to be dammed, diverting the stream that feeds the pool into the mines and the living quarters of Castamere. Thus did House Rayne's namesake lake, which first gave them life during the Age of Heroes, become their doom as well. Lannister men stationed near the entrance claimed to hear screaming and shouting as the mines and the living quarters slowly filled up with water. If true, They would have heard a lot of this. The waters of Castamere did not rush through in a great flood. They came slowly, inexorably. The final result was certain. House Rain was destroyed utterly. It was devastating and brutal, cruel even. House Lannister were established once more as the preeminent house in the Westerlands, but over the bodies of literally thousands of their opponents, and perhaps even more innocent servants, visitors, and random people who were in those halls at that time. It wasn't long before a song was written about Tywin's actions. The dripping that eventually drowned all inhabitants is why the song is called the Rains of Castamere, which of course is also a play on House Rain's name. To remind the West of the power of Casterly Rock, Castamere and Tarbeck Hall were never granted to new families. They stand as mute testimony to Tywin's brutality and power, much in the way Harrenhal reminded the realm of what dragons could do to them. From that point forward, Tywin could threaten a vassal with nothing but a singer armed with that one particular song. Lady Catelyn knew this, and it filled her with dread. She quickly, though well too late, perceived that threat. Prior to the Red Wedding, Roose Bolton predicted the death of Vargo Hoat and said so to Jaime Lannister. Our goat, Vargo Hoat was known as the Goat after the Black Goat of Qohor, where he's from, should have remembered the Tarbecks and Rains, Bolton mused. They might have warned him how your Lord Father deals with betrayal. Jaime responded, There are no Tarbecks or Rains. Roose's point precisely. But back in 261 AC, long before he was slain by Jaime the Kingslayer, Prince Aerys, a man not shy about burning people, was impressed by Tywin's drownings. Only a year later, when he ascended to the Iron Throne, he chose Tywin to be his hand. Though he completely wiped out both houses, we hear of no punishment from Lord Tytos either. Thus, one of the most famous massacres in Westeros netted Tywin a huge promotion, though, as we know, his relationship with King Aerys was far from smooth. Tywin must have considered the Red Wedding a sufficient update to his reputation, because he finally granted Castamere to someone. Sir Rolf Spicer, grandson of Maggie the Frog and uncle to the widowed Queen Jane Westerling, has it now. Whether he will be able to hold it, let alone restore the flooded mines and galleries, remains to be seen. No one has been given Lord Tarbeck's former seat, however, but the wars in Westeros rage on and Tywin is dead. Casterly Rock might restore those lands to reward a lesser lord or knight for good service. Thanks to Tyrion and a crossbow, a new chapter has begun, one that might see a future for one or both houses. It may even be Tyrion himself who enables a complete restoration, a way to distance himself from his father's deeds. Regardless of how he is viewed by others, the legacy of Tywin Lannister looms so large that his place in history is all but assured. His actions towards houses Tarbeck and Rain will not soon be forgotten, even if their lands are in fact reclaimed. Of all his deeds, it may be the most famous, simply because it has been enshrined forever in song. The Rains of Castamere song could easily outlast the histories, as they are known to do in A Song of Ice and Fire. Especially if the real world is any indication, versions of the song exist all over the internet, totaling tens of millions of streams and downloads. Though Tywin's long shadow has passed, a future Lord of Casterly Rock may revive, if not continue, his practice of sending a mere singer to warn those who would test the long and sharp claws of the Lion of Lannister. As the song goes, "And who are you, the proud lord said, that I must bow so low? Only a cat of a different coat, that's all the truth I know. In a coat of gold or a coat of red, a lion still has claws, and mine are long and sharp, my lord, as long and sharp as yours." And so he spoke, that Lord of Castamere. But now the rains weep o'er his hall, with no one there to hear. Yes, now the rains weep o'er his hall, not a soul to hear. And so he spoke, that Lord of Castamere, and now the rains weep o'er his hall, with no one there to hear. Yes, now the rains weep o'er his hall, and not a soul to hear. If you'd like to see more A Song of Ice and Fire videos, please click on the link on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.